The Concorde Airport 79 is the fourth and final film in the 1970s airport disaster films franchise. An American-owned French-operated Concorde supersonic jet takes off from Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, France, headed for Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. The captain, Paul Matrand, played by French actor Alain Delon, makes conversations with the purser and his lover, Isabelle, played by Sylvia Kristel.
I was surprised to see your name on the crew list this morning.
Life is full of surprises. You still take it black?
Mm-hmm. I heard you retired.
For a short time. I've changed my mind.
I'm glad you did.
Is there anything else you need, Captain?
The jet arrives in Washington, D.C. to great fanfare, with a planned flight of goodwill to Paris and then on to Moscow for the upcoming 1980 Summer Olympics. Investigative reporter Maggie Whalen, played by Susan Blakely, reports on the Concorde's arrival, as well as an aerospace engineer named Dr. Kevin Harrison, played by Robert Wagner, and his work on a new surface-to-air missile project.
Once locked to its prey, the super-fast bird electronically homes in on its target.
After a man shows up at Maggie's house with a claim that Harrison Industries is conducting illegal arms deals to communist countries, the man is killed by an assailant, and Maggie barely escapes with her life. Having a romantic affair with Kevin Harrison, Maggie confides in him the information the deceased man gave to her. Kevin seems stunned by the claims of illegal arms deals and consoles Maggie, telling her that someone is trying to frame him.
Why would your own people want to blackmail you?
Because big business is like that kid's game, King of the Mountain. When you're on top, somebody always wants to knock you on your ass.
Are you saying you've never made illegal arms sales?
Maggie, I'm a very rich man. I have everything in life I could ever want. Why would I jeopardize that by doing something so incredibly stupid?
Of course, Kevin is full of shit. He's in on the arms deals to communist countries and decides to reschedule the launch of his Buzzard surface-to-air missile test to coincide with the takeoff of the Concorde. Meanwhile, Captain Joe Petroni, played by George Kennedy, meets with Captain Matrand as the two prepare to pilot the Concorde flight from Washington to Paris and then on to Moscow.
Now here's a beautiful lady.
Yes. You have good taste, Joseph. There's nothing like her in the skies.
They board the flight alongside Second Officer and Flight Engineer Peter O'Neill, played by actor David Warner. As Maggie prepares to board the airplane, the deceased man's wife delivers documents that prove that Kevin Harrison is behind the arms deal and that he has been lying to her. As the plane takes off from Washington, Harrison does all he can to try and sabotage his Buzzard missile system and use one of them to destroy the Concorde jet.
We have an emergency. Repeat, emergency. We have a malfunctioning drone off course from a test range. The Air Force jets are responding.
I hit the seatbelt sign.
Petroni and Matrand have to use evasive maneuvers to try and avoid the missile until the U.S. Air Force scrambles an F-15 fighter jet to intercept.
If you have a shoot, we'll end up with a missile in our laps.
After the close call from a surface-to-air missile, Harrison sends an F-4 fighter jet piloted by a mercenary to fire on the Concorde.
Tracers, he's on his cannons!
Power arm! Engine 2!
French Air Force F-1s scramble and shoot down the F-4, but the Concorde sustains some damage and diverts to Le Bourget Airport just outside of Paris rather than its original destination of Charles de Gaulle Airport.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Paris.
In Paris, Kevin meets with Maggie and reassures her that he will make a statement and will go public about the arms deals. Paul and Joe meet for dinner in Paris, with Paul setting Joe up on a blind date with a woman named Francine, played by Bibi Anderson.
I was married. My wife was killed in a car accident.
Do you miss her?
Very much.
Do you have children?
I have a boy. He's just starting college.
Ah, oui? My son just started college, the Sorbonne.
College? You don't look old enough to have a child in the 5th grade.
After a night of wonderful chemistry and sweaty coitus, Petroni discovers that she was a hooker. But he doesn't care.
You goddamn son of a bitch. She was great!
What a friend for!
As the Concorde jet prepares to leave Paris for Moscow, a mechanic paid by Harrison sets a device in the cargo door of the Concorde, timed to open the cargo door mid-flight as a last-ditch effort to destroy Maggie, the Concorde, and all of its passengers. Also starring Eddie Albert as the airline owner, Sybil Danning as his trophy wife, Charo as a woman who tries to sneak a dog onto the aircraft, Cicely Tyson as a mother to a child desperately in need of a heart transplant, Martha Ray as an old lady who can't stay out of the bathroom, and Jimmy Walker as a saxophone player. This film has quite a large all-star cast. It was filmed between November 1978 and February 1979 in Paris, Washington, Utah, and Los Angeles. This was French superstar Alain Delon's final attempt to make a name for himself in Hollywood and crack the U.S. market. It didn't work, and despite being a huge star in France, Alain Delon never really caught on big in the United States, but I think he's really good in this movie. George Kennedy returns once again as Joe Petroni, a character he played in all 4 airport films. At one point, his character says to Susan Blakely's character Maggie Whalen that he remembered her from the emergency landing in Salt Lake City.
Thank you.
I haven't seen you since 1975, that crash landing at Salt Lake City.
That is a reference to Airport 1975, and it is the only time in any airport sequel that a reference is made to one of the other movies. Sylvia Kristel lost out on the role of Dr. Holly Goodhead in the 1979 James Bond film Moonraker due to the commitment she had to work on this film. I always liked Sylvia Kristel. She had such a beautiful face, and I always like how she could have this sexy, serious look, but then when she smiles, it's just adorable. I think she's a real nice treat for this film. The Concorde aircraft used in the film first flew on January 31st, 1975. It would be leased to Air France in 1976. In 1989, this Concorde jet carried Pope John Paul II. The actual plane used in this film crashed in Gonesse, France on July 25, 2000, while trying to make an emergency landing at Le Bourget Airport, the same airport as in this movie. A metallic strip on the runway at Charles de Gaulle Airport had fallen from a Continental Airlines DC-10 that had taken off just minutes earlier and punctured a tire on the Concorde's left main wheel. This ruptured a fuel tank, with the leaking fuel catching fire and causing the plane to lose power. All 109 passengers and crew on board, plus 4 people on the ground, were killed. Upon its release in August 1979, the Concorde grossed only $13 million in the U.S. and Canada. On a budget of $14 million, this was very disappointing, and this ended the huge box office success of the airport films. However, this movie would wind up grossing $52 million additional dollars internationally for a worldwide total of $65 million. Even still, this movie had the lowest financial intake of the 4 airport films. In fact, this film was laughed off the screen during its initial screening for industry members and press at the Universal Studios lot. While I agree the plot is rather ridiculous, the star power and the steady pace of the movie makes this one enjoyable for someone who is a fan of the Airport series. Nevertheless, the bad reviews, the low box office gross, and the parody film Airplane, which would be a huge success a year later in 1980, effectively ended the Airport film series. It is very difficult to rank all 4 Airport films in any kind of order. Each one had its positives and its negatives. The first movie was filmed in 1969, released in 1970, and had a very general audience 1960s soap opera type feel to it. But it was a massive success and not only inspired all of the sequels, but pretty much started the 1970s disaster film trend. The sequel, Airport 1975, was released in 1974, just a month before Earthquake, which also starred George Kennedy and Charlton Heston. It was a pretty good flick. Airport 77 made some decent money and had a wonderful cast and gave the movie a water aspect to the disaster. That was cool. And this film adds a national security issue to the plot, and coming out in 1979, you can tell it was released at a time when the 1970s disaster movies were on the way out. Overall, I enjoyed this movie much more than I expected given how much people rip it apart in reviews. I thought the male characters had great chemistry and wonderful guy humor.
There's a story that back in the 20s when he was barnstorming, he made a bet that he could put it to this good-looking wing walker. He boffed her out on the wing 1,000 feet above El Paso. His ass got so sunburned he couldn't sit down for a week.
And I must say, I find the actresses in this movie far more attractive than some of the previous sequels. I personally prefer Susan Blakely and Sylvia Kristel over, say, Lee Grant and Brenda Vaccaro. For those who might only be familiar with the 1980 Airplane film, which makes fun of the Airport series, I recommend that you watch the Airport films to get a fresh take on what exactly made them so big in the first place to even get a parody movie in 1980. For the continuity, the humor, the entertaining popcorn flick aspect to the plot, the great acting, and the beautiful women, I'll go ahead and give this movie the same 7-star rating I gave to each of the other Airport films. If you're a fan of the Airport series or 1970s disaster films, I recommend the Concorde Airport 79.